In 2018, I was stationed at a remote military base in the middle of nowhere. It was an old facility used during World War II and later abandoned for decades before being repurposed. The base had a history of strange occurrences, but most of us brushed off the stories as mere rumors. That was until the night we encountered the Phantom Soldier. It was a cold, moonless night, and I was on guard duty with my friend, Corporal Jenkins. The base was eerily quiet, with only the sounds of the wind rustling through the nearby trees. Around midnight, we heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching from the darkness. Jenkins and I exchanged glances, both of us gripping our rifles a little tighter. "Who goes there?" Jenkins called out, his voice steady but tense. There was no response, just the continued sound of footsteps. We pointed our flashlights in the direction of the noise, and what we saw made our blood run cold. Standing at the edge of the light was a soldier in old-fashioned military gear, his uniform tattered and stained. His eyes were vacant, and his face was pale, almost translucent. He looked like he had walked straight out of a history book. The air around him was unnaturally cold, and a sense of dread washed over us. "Identify yourself," I shouted, my voice wavering slightly. The soldier didn't respond. Instead, he turned and began walking away, his figure fading into the darkness. Determined to get to the bottom of this, we decided to follow him, our flashlights flickering as we moved. The soldier led us to an old, dilapidated bunker at the edge of the base, a place long forgotten and overgrown with weeds. As we approached, the temperature dropped even further, and we could see our breath in the air. The soldier stopped at the entrance of the bunker and turned to face us. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the silence heavy and oppressive. Suddenly, the soldier raised his hand and pointed inside the bunker. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he vanished into thin air. Jenkins and I stood there, stunned and terrified. But curiosity got the better of us, and we cautiously entered the bunker. Inside, the bunker was dark and musty, with the faint smell of decay. We scanned the room with our flashlights, revealing old military equipment and long-forgotten supplies. In the corner, we found a small, makeshift grave, marked with a rusted helmet and a crudely carved cross. It was then that we realized the truth. The Phantom Soldier was one of our own, a forgotten soul lost in the chaos of war. We reported our encounter to our superiors, who were skeptical at first, but agreed to investigate. A team was sent to the bunker, and they unearthed the remains of the soldier. He was given a proper burial with full military honors, and the old bunker was sealed off. Since that night, the base has been free of ghostly encounters. It seems that the Phantom Soldier had found peace at last. But for Jenkins and me, the memory of that cold, moonless night and the spectral figure of the forgotten soldier will haunt us forever. In 2019, my unit was deployed to an old military base deep in the forest of Eastern Europe. The base had been abandoned since the Cold War, left to decay and be reclaimed by nature. Our mission was to secure and evaluate the site for possible use as a new forward operating base. From the moment we arrived, there was an eerie atmosphere that none of us could shake. The base was vast, with crumbling buildings and overgrown paths. The centerpiece was a large underground bunker, which had been the command center. The locals told us to stay away from the bunker, claiming it was haunted. They spoke of strange noises, ghostly apparitions, and people who had entered but never returned. We dismissed these as superstitions, but the feeling of unease persisted. On the third night, I was assigned to patrol the perimeter with Sergeant Williams. The night was dark and silent, the only sound the crunch of our boots on the gravel. As we neared the entrance to the bunker, we heard a low, rhythmic thumping sound coming from within. We exchanged uneasy glances, but decided to investigate. The bunker was pitch black, the air damp and cold. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing rusted machinery and long-abandoned control panels. The thumping grew louder as we descended deeper into the bunker. It seemed to be coming from one of the lower levels, where the old barracks and storage rooms were located. As we approached the source of the noise, we heard whispers, faint but unmistakable. We rounded a corner and saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was a soldier, dressed in an old Soviet uniform, his face pale and expressionless. He stared at us for a moment, before turning and walking through a solid wall. Williams and I froze, our minds struggling to process what we had just seen. Gathering our courage, we moved towards the wall, which revealed a hidden door partially concealed by debris. We pushed it open and found ourselves in a small, musty room. Inside were old cots, decaying uniforms, and the source of the thumping, a large metal locker. The locker rattled violently, as if something inside was trying to get out. We cautiously approached and opened it, only to find it empty. The room suddenly grew colder, and we felt an oppressive presence around us. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. We decided it was time to leave. As we retraced our steps, the bunker seemed to come alive with activity. Shadows flitted across the walls, and we heard footsteps behind us, though no one was there. By the time we reached the surface, we were both shaken and exhausted. We reported our experience to the commanding officer, who ordered a thorough investigation of the bunker. Over the next few days, several more soldiers reported similar encounters. Eventually, it was decided to abandon the base. The bunker was sealed off, and the site was left to the ghosts of its past. Years later, I still think about that night in the haunted bunker. The image of the ghostly soldier and the sense of unseen eyes watching us remain vivid in my mind. Some places, it seems, are best left undisturbed, their secrets buried with the memories of those who once walked their halls. In 2020, I was stationed in a region known for its bloody history during World War II. The area had been the site of intense battles, and many soldiers had lost their lives there. Our mission was to conduct training exercises, but the weight of the past lingered in the air, giving the place an unsettling atmosphere. One evening, after a long day of drills, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the landscape. As I walked through the fields, I came across a small, overgrown cemetery. It was a forgotten place, with weathered headstones barely visible among the tall grass. I felt an inexplicable pull to enter, so I did. As I stood among the graves, the air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of gunfire. I looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, but saw nothing. Suddenly, the fog parted, revealing a group of spectral soldiers standing at attention. Their uniforms were tattered and blood-stained, their faces gaunt and hollow. They stared straight ahead, as if waiting for orders. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I was seeing the ghosts of the soldiers who had died in battle here. They began to march, their movements slow and deliberate. I watched in horrified fascination as they reenacted their final moments. One of the ghostly soldiers broke away from the group and approached me. His eyes were filled with a deep sadness, and he raised a trembling hand as if to touch me. I wanted to run, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away. The soldier spoke in a low, mournful voice, "Help us." The weight of his plea pressed down on me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I didn't know how to help them, but I promised to do what I could. As soon as I uttered the words, the fog lifted and the ghosts began to fade. The soldier who had spoken to me gave one last sorrowful glance before disappearing into the night. Shaken, I returned to my unit and shared my experience with my commanding officer. He listened intently and suggested we hold a memorial service to honor the fallen soldiers. We gathered the next day at the cemetery, and a chaplain led us in a solemn ceremony. We laid wreaths on the graves and said prayers for the souls of the departed. After the service, the atmosphere of the area seemed to lighten. The oppressive feeling that had hung over the battlefield was gone, replaced by a sense of peace. The ghostly soldiers had not appeared again, and I like to think that we had finally helped them find the rest they deserved. The memory of that night stays with me, a reminder of the sacrifices made by those who came before us. The ghosts of the battlefield may have found peace, but their stories will never be forgotten. In the summer of 2022, my unit was deployed to a remote desert region for reconnaissance and surveillance. The area was known for its harsh climate and treacherous terrain, but it also had a darker reputation. Locals spoke of soldiers who had ventured into the desert, never to return. They called it the Vanishing Sands. We brushed off these tales as folklore, but what we experienced would forever change our perception. One evening, I was part of a small patrol assigned to scout a particularly isolated area of the desert. Our mission was routine: to gather intelligence and ensure there were no threats in the vicinity. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the endless dunes. As night fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, and an eerie silence settled over the landscape. Our patrol consisted of 5 men, including myself. We moved cautiously, keeping our eyes peeled for any signs of movement. After several hours, we came across an old, abandoned outpost, half buried in sand. It was clear no one had been there for years. We decided to set up a temporary camp and rest before continuing our patrol. As we settled in, we heard a faint, rhythmic drumming sound. It seemed to come from all directions, growing louder and more insistent. We scanned the horizon, but saw nothing. The sound was unnerving, like a heartbeat echoing through the desert. Suddenly, our radios crackled to life with static, followed by distorted voices. We tried to communicate with base, but the signal was too weak and garbled to understand. One of our comrades, Private Thompson, suggested it might be a malfunction, but the rest of us felt a growing sense of unease. The drumming continued, and we began to see strange lights flickering in the distance. They moved erratically, like will-o'-the-wisps, and seemed to be drawing closer. Determined to find out what was going on, we decided to investigate. As we approached the lights, the air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring our vision. The drumming was now deafening, reverberating through our bodies. Out of the fog emerged figures, clad in ancient military gear, their faces obscured by helmets and gas masks. They marched in formation, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. We called out to them, but they did not respond. Instead, they continued their march, passing through us as if we weren't there. The temperature dropped even further, and the fog thickened. The figures began to fade, and soon we were left standing alone in the eerie silence. We turned to head back to our camp, but we were disoriented and unable to find our way. The fog had enveloped everything, and our compasses spun wildly. Panic set in as we realized we were lost. We tried to retrace our steps, but the landscape seemed to shift and change around us. Hours passed, and exhaustion began to take its toll. We decided to stop and rest, hoping the fog would lift by morning. As we huddled together, we heard the drumming once more, now faint and distant. The ghostly figures appeared again, moving in the same relentless march. This time, they were accompanied by whispers, voices speaking in an unknown language. When dawn finally broke, the fog dissipated, and we found ourselves back at the abandoned outpost. It was as if we had been walking in circles all night. Our radios were working again, and we managed to contact base. They sent a search party to retrieve us, and we returned to camp, shaken but unharmed. Back at base, we reported our encounter, but our superiors were skeptical. They attributed our experience to stress and the disorienting effects of the desert. However, we knew what we had seen. The vanishing sands had claimed many before us, and we had come dangerously close to joining them. To this day, the memory of that night haunts me. The ghostly soldiers. In the spring of 2017, my unit was assigned to a dense forest region for a series of training exercises. The area was remote, far from any civilization, and known for its treacherous terrain and thick underbrush. The locals called it the Whispering Woods because of the strange sounds that echoed through the trees at night. Most of us dismissed the stories as local superstition, but we soon realized there was something truly eerie about this place. On the first night, we set up camp near a clearing. As the sun set, an uneasy silence fell over the forest. The usual sounds of nocturnal wildlife were absent, replaced by an odd, whispering wind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The whispers were faint, almost indiscernible, but they carried a sense of urgency and fear. During my watch, I decided to investigate the source of the whispers. Armed with my flashlight and rifle, I ventured into the forest, my heart pounding with a mix of curiosity and dread. The deeper I went, the louder the whispers became. They seemed to form words. Though I couldn't understand the language, it was like the forest itself was alive, trying to communicate with me. I came across an old, overgrown path that led to a small clearing. In the center of the clearing was a large, gnarled tree with twisted branches that seemed to reach out like skeletal fingers. The whispers were louder here, almost deafening. As I approached the tree, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like something was watching me. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I saw my breath fogging in the cold air. The whispers grew more frantic, and I noticed movement among the shadows. Ghostly figures began to materialize around the tree, their forms translucent and ethereal. They were soldiers, dressed in old military uniforms, their faces twisted in agony. They seemed to be reliving their final moments, trapped in an endless loop of suffering. One of the ghostly soldiers broke away from the others and approached me. His eyes were hollow, and his mouth moved as if he were trying to speak, but no sound came out. He reached out towards me, his hand passing through my chest, filling me with an icy coldness that took my breath away. I stumbled back, my flashlight flickering wildly. The whispers turned into screams, and the ghostly figures began to converge on me. Panic set in, and I turned to run, but my legs felt like they were moving through molasses. The ghostly soldier reached out again, his hand grazing my shoulder, sending a shock of pain through my body. I broke free and sprinted back towards the camp, the whispers and screams following me until I burst through the tree line. Back at the camp, I found my comrades awake, drawn by the noise. I told them what I had seen, and though some were skeptical, others shared their own experiences of hearing the whispers and seeing shadowy figures. We decided to move our camp closer to the edge of the forest, hoping to escape the eerie presence that haunted the woods. Over the next few days, we continued our training exercises, but the whispers never completely stopped. They were always there, just at the edge of hearing, a constant reminder of the forest's dark history. We learned that the area had been the site of a brutal battle during a past conflict, and many soldiers had died there. Their bodies never recovered. When our training was complete, we were all relieved to leave the whispering woods behind. The memory of those ghostly soldiers and their tortured whispers stayed with me, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that linger in places marked by tragedy. The forest may have been beautiful in the daylight, but at night it was a place of shadows and whispers, where the past refused to stay buried. In the winter of 2021, my platoon was deployed to a remote mountain range for a series of tactical training exercises. The terrain was harsh, and the weather conditions were brutal. The area had a dark history, having been the site of numerous conflicts over the centuries. Our objective was to navigate through the mountains and reach a designated checkpoint within a week. Little did we know, the mountains held secrets far more sinister than we could have imagined. On the third night, as we set up camp in a sheltered valley, we noticed a change in the atmosphere. The air grew colder, and a dense fog rolled in, obscuring our surroundings. We could barely see a few feet in front of us. As we huddled around the campfire, strange noises began to echo through the fog. It sounded like distant cries and whispers, but we couldn't pinpoint the source. One of our comrades, Private Lee, suggested it might be animals or the wind playing tricks on us. But the longer we listened, the more we realized these were human voices. We decided to investigate, splitting into pairs and moving cautiously through the fog. My partner, Sergeant Harris, and I took the northern perimeter. As we moved deeper into the fog, the whispers grew louder and more distinct. We heard snatches of conversations, cries for help, and commands being shouted. It was as if we were walking through a battlefield, frozen in time. Suddenly, we stumbled upon an old, crumbling stone monument, partially buried under snow and debris. It was a memorial, covered in names of soldiers who had died in battles long past. Before we could examine it further, the temperature plummeted, and we felt an icy presence around us. The fog thickened, and we saw shadowy figures moving towards us. They were ghostly soldiers, their faces contorted in pain and fear. They marched in formation, their movements mechanical and eerie. We were frozen in place, unable to move or speak. The ghostly soldiers passed through us, their cold, spectral forms sending chills down our spines. As they moved past, We could hear their whispers more clearly. They spoke of betrayal, ambushes, and a cursed mission that had doomed them all. It was then we realized these were the spirits of a platoon that had been sent on a similar mission decades ago, but had never returned. Sergeant Harris and I turned to run back to camp, but the fog seemed to close in around us, making it difficult to find our way. The whispers followed us, growing louder and more frantic. We finally broke through the fog and found the rest of our comrades who had experienced similar encounters. Private Lee, who had been skeptical earlier, was visibly shaken, recounting how he had seen ghostly figures walking through the camp. We decided to abandon our mission and head back to base. As we packed up, the fog began to recede, and the ghostly presence faded. We left the cursed valley, but the memory of those spectral soldiers haunted us all. Upon returning to base, we reported our experiences to our superiors. They listened, but seemed skeptical, attributing it to stress and the harsh conditions. A few days later, we learned from local historians that the valley had indeed been the site of a tragic military operation during a past conflict. A platoon had been ambushed and slaughtered, their bodies never recovered. It was said their spirits roamed the mountains, reliving their final moments in an endless loop. The cursed platoon remains a chilling reminder of the past, and those who venture into the mountains are warned to stay clear of the haunted valley. To this day, I can still hear their whispers in my dreams, a testament to the souls trapped in an eternal struggle, seeking redemption or a way out of their cursed fate.